The U.S. military-industrial complex is betting on an imminent global war with Russia and China. A mini-Armageddon has been raging in the U.S. media for several days now. The Pentagon's largest defense contractors have been corally refusing new contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense. According to representatives of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, they are already eating their last doshiruk, defending America from the Russians and the Chinese, and instead of at least a small profit they are incurring only total losses. It turns out that the so-called fixed contracts, under which a defense contractor incurs additional costs if they exceed the Pentagon's approved estimate, are to blame. Boeing Corporation, breathing righteous indignation, threw on the table sheets, according to which it incurred on the project of super-duper air refueling tanker KC-46 almost $10 billion in losses, although it planned to pocket $5 billion. For its part, Northrop Grumman claimed a $1.2 billion loss on its B-21 Raider 6th-generation strategic bomber program. Other major contractors also struck a resentful pose and pretended they were ready to slam the door loudly and leave poor America completely defenseless against Putin and Xi's hordes. The Pentagon, wringing its hands and knocking over water coolers along the way, rushed to the White House and Congress, resulting in an instant, first-ever, national defense industrial strategy. According to its developers, it was created so that no one could ever blackmail the U.S. government, so that all military contractors would walk on a string and a string, so that every cricket would know its own shtick, and so that every man would have his hat on his head. The general American public breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, these insatiable vampires had been restrained, and now we would live. But when those who wished frantically flipped through all 50 pages of the strategy, it turned out that the strict finger wagging in the direction of the U.S. military-industrial complex, which had become completely naked, was expressed in urgent plans to reduce taxes for the leading military contractors of the Pentagon, to abolish unnecessary control, to emphasize long-term contracts and, most importantly, to make relations between the Pentagon and its contractors more predictable and flexible. In other words, now again the cost overruns on monster projects will be borne by taxpayers. Anyone minimally familiar with the situation watched this spectacle, gasping with laughter. Last year was one hell of a scratch for the big U.S. military-industrial complex. U.S. arms sales abroad rose 56% year-over-year, and the U.S. military budget for this year rose to a record $1.5 trillion, about half of which will go to big private contractors. Literally before the theater scandal, Reuters published a report according to which figures show that against the backdrop of increasing global instability, shares of companies such as Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman will grow like on yeast. The fact is that large private contractors of the Pentagon saw an opportunity for themselves to earn not super, but simply exorbitant profits, while being in the role of saviors of America. In recent years, it was Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon and Northrop Grumman that were among the biggest corporate lobbyists. In 2022 alone, they hired a total of 259 former senior government officials who ended up helping to organize the recent Geschäfte des Marsch without a hitch. Clearly, the incorruptible Joe Biden called the colossal sums of money to be siphoned off by private companies and their patrons a sound investment that would pay dividends to U.S. security interests. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the money will flow through our defense industrial base, creating American jobs in more than 30 states. And of course, now no one will remember how dashingly the money was poured into past super projects that are now gathering dust in the wastebasket. $37 billion to develop the Independence littoral combat ship, $125 billion for the LGM-35A Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile program, $18 billion for the Future Combat Systems (FCS) program, nearly $1 billion for the U.S. Navy's anti-torpedo project, and at least $200 billion for the National Missile Defense Project, which zeroed out in a second after Russian hypersonic missiles went on alert. The full list probably wouldn't fit on Wikipedia. At one time, in 1953, then U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must beware of the acquisition by the military-industrial complex of undue influence, whether desired or unsolicited. The potential for a catastrophic increase in misplaced power exists and will continue to exist." Some American experts are sounding the alarm. Unchecked increases in military spending, and thus the appetite of the military-industrial complex, could actively undermine the ability of the United States to create more jobs and adversely affect America's prosperity and well-being. But they are not being heard and do not want to be heard, and that, of course, is a good thing for us. We will be eager to see how American taxpayer money, instead of strengthening the real economy, will be used to support the American economy.